The 90th anniversary of the Manly Art Gallery and Museum is this year, and as a result I was given the honour of photographing regional artists for a celebration of this event. With the artists I already knew, I was really looking forward to catching up with them again, because artists themselves are very isolated individuals working in their own studios. The artists were deeply absorbed in their own projects, in their own work. My task was to create a synergy and a trust and a form of collaboration with them in order to make a portrait. And 9 times out of 10 they were pretty much into the same idea, and the fact that they are visual artists gave them and me an opportunity to engage properly in the production of an artwork, which in this case is a portrait of them. Well, it's got to be back as early as the late 60s, shortly after I became involved with photography. I think I've always been about that far away from photographing artists. I grew up with artists in the family. Both my eldest siblings went to the National Art School, and also I used to go to the local watering hole known as the Windsor Castle Hotel, which was where artists gathered. People like John Olsen would drink there. That's where I first met him. Donald Friend drank there regularly. John Bell, the young enfant terrible of the Sydney art world. Just prior to that, I've got to say, one of the most significant introductions to the art world was being asked by Martin Sharp to become his studio assistant, and that was in 1965. From that point on, I met a lot of artists, and it gave me an introduction, because he was also one of the celebrity artists of the period. He also put a brush in my hand. He was the one to say, you know, I'll do this painting and you can work on that one there. He went off to England, following in the footsteps of Richard Neville. They began London Oz magazine over there, and he was there probably for 4 or 5 years. Achieved quite a bit of success in the UK. He did some wonderful posters. He sort of hit the ground running like a celebrity does, and then he came back, and by that stage I'd become immersed in photography. I was going to go to the UK, but I ended up being offered a job by an English photographer who began a studio here in Sydney, and that seemed to be an easier and better option because I was already interested in photography. At the Yellow House, which brought a lot of artists together, and it was a bit of a dream, and it worked out well for a little period of time, and I think that fostered my interest in making portraits of artists. It's where I first met Brett Whiteley. It's where I did portraits of him there. I did portraits of Martin Sharp there and of George Gittos, and it was a part of my career that wasn't necessarily planned, but it just evolved. I was born at Manly Hospital back in 1946. Grew up in Dee Why. I went to Manly High School in the early 60s. I have a very familiar relationship to the Manly Warringah area, you know, the fun park over at Manly Wharf, and the aquarium. Manly Ferry, of course, was one of my favourite trips into the city with my mother, and I thought I was born into some sort of utopianic world. Dick Watkins, well, I've known Dick for some time. I heard somebody describe him as the father of abstraction in Australia. His whole personality comes in at you from a different angle. He has a somewhat gruff, questioning, but also hospitable character. He had this painting on the wall that he'd just completed, and it was in blue, and he showed me a few things around the studio, and he had this old music stand which he informed me belonged to his father, and got his approval to put it in the photograph. He felt that that was like bringing Dad in, and I had this funny experience where I asked him to hold a paintbrush, and he sort of looked at me and he said, "What, you want me to pretend to paint?" So he held this dry brush in his hand and looked at me rather suspiciously, and I got a good shot. I first, back in the old days, stumbled upon the Latin meaning of the word photography, which actually means light writing. I found that really interesting because I realised that these visual sort of things that are being produced called photographs are actually written by light, and I felt that in the early days natural light was the go-to solution for me. My first portraits of artists were done with natural light coming through a window. I found it gave a bit of side lighting, provided it wasn't too dark on the shadow side, that you'd get the chiaroscuro appearance. And I think in most cases I've preferred to try and replicate three-dimensionality. And I noticed that in a lot of magazines of late, and even newspapers, the look is to be flat, full lit, front on, you know, kind of blast the daylights out of the subject. So I'm just hoping it swings back to a bit of classicism eventually, and you know, maybe it will. Julia, to my increased interest, is intrigued by tunnels, dark, mysterious tunnels, things that go under the ground that people have built, companies have built in the past for various reasons. That was the most difficult situation, photographing Julie, because there was no light. Where she was working was in a very dark, dim little area, so I was challenged by the lack of light and challenged by the sort of grunginess of the circumstances, but it was probably the most challenging portrait, but I think I got some good results. Well, Catherine, I hadn't met before, and I looked at her work and I saw that it was pretty powerful, realist paintings. I was quite amazed when I went to her studio and saw the size of her paintings, and I was probably amazed that she managed to create such incredible realism of faces, in many cases her daughter's face, on 2 or 2.5 metre square paintings, and intention was to create a strong, powerful portrait of a woman artist, and she fitted the bill. With Bruce Gould, I was delighted to find that he was one of the artists on the list. I first knew Bruce in the Yellow House days of 1971, and it was just like two old friends getting together, and we reminisced and had a bit of fun. I set up this portrait, which is one of my favourites in the exhibition. He is a great printmaker. He's got a unique vision, a unique style. It's, everything that he does has an echo of something that's ubiquitously Australian, and he loved it and gave it to his daughter, Lucy, who took it back to New York. So I've actually made it into New York now, and the world is, the sky's the limit. I've known Mick also for a very long time, and I've watched his progress as an artist, and realised that his commitment to the first Australian heritage of Australia, of Sydney and the environments around Sydney, is more detailed and more thorough than anybody else I've known. He has completely explored the landscape and discovered the meanings of the rock engravings, and made it his specialty to paint pre-colonial landscapes of those same sites, which still exists, like museums and art galleries do. They're the indigenous museum and art galleries of the Manly-Warringah region. I mean, I've always felt with portraits, with photographic portraits, because they're so real in terms of the camera doesn't lie, etc. I've personally adopted an attitude to try to make the subject look dignified. With a subject and with couples, you're working on two levels and you're trying to get them to show you who they are simultaneously. And that's not easy, because one might withdraw and the other one might come forward in terms of allowing you into their soul, and then getting to that point where they're both letting you in at the same time and having the other dynamics working, lighting, composition. Like Cartier-Bresson said, you compose with the mind and shoot with the heart. And at that point, you've got to just trust that what you're doing is going to serve the task. In a way, I find that after about what I term one roll of film, which is 36 exposures, and now that is with digital where you can do 500, I tend to stop after about 36 exposures without counting. It's just in the DNA now, and then it's a matter of editing and finding out which one really does speak to you. I knew that Hellier had a few health problems, and Durrani was very concerned about him being able to be up to it. You know, they live on a steep block overlooking the Middle Harbour or the Spit or something like that. And Hellier was very happy to perform for the camera. He's a bit of a old rake, really. You know, he kind of he shaped up really well, and I found that their studio, which was beautifully equipped with old silver jewellery making equipment and little stone cutters and gem polishers and everything, you know, reeked of tradition. Driving to Avert's place was extremely nostalgic for me, because he's only a few blocks away from where I grew up. When I arrived, the front of the house doesn't reveal how big his studio is. It had sliding doors on it to fit big canvases in and out, and it was arranged with some incredible portraits on the wall. It was one of those sessions where I felt I can really give people the patina of the interior of the studio here, and I think it was good to do a portrait of a portrait artist. Also, of course, if you can get a little bit of the environment that the artist works in, that adds a little bit more intrigue, and whatever it is that's in the artist's studio has information in it. Amanda Penrose Hart sort of fired back this expression that I've never ever witnessed from her before, and just I snapped it in an instant. And when I saw the print, I thought, it speaks of mischief, and it speaks of knowledge, it speaks of 1,000 different interpretations. There's the difficulty is to get beyond the mask, because we all have them, and I think she's completely dropped her mask, and we see something of the woman inside. I've got a little black frame around all of these prints, only small, very thin. That was embedded in my training back in the old days to shoot full frame and compose, because with 35mm you need every millimetre of that piece of film in order to get maximum quality. It's the perfect size to compose within, and I usually find composition within that framework really satisfying. You know, here is Salvatore, you know, sort of an Italian in Australia, who also grew up not far from where I grew up in DY, and I was happy to sort of get him, you know, with his brushes and that amazing mount. He even said to me, he said, "Do you think there's anybody else in this country that can paint like this, you know, with a sable brush and doing doing a 4-metre painting, you know. I didn't know, I don't think so, Salvatore. I don't think there's anybody in this country that's going to paint like that. He was very pleased with that. He knows that that's true too. In this case, we're looking at visual artists, and the reason I find them the most interesting people in the world is that they're explorers in their own way. They're trying to interpret what I personally regard as the mystery or the phenomena of the real world, and they don't take reality for granted. They interrogate their own existence, and they interrogate their own ability to define that existence. And in so doing, they create an explanation for everybody to witness. And this is what I've found and have always found fascinating by artists.